urges Kenyans to reject Finance Bill 2026 over tax burden. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, kindly consider subscribing. Don't forget to like, comment, and share our videos. Safina party leader Jimmy Wanjigi has raised alarm over the Finance Bill 2026 and the recently unveiled 4.81 trillion Kenyan shillings national budget, calling on Kenyans to reject what he termed as a debt budget designed to service questionable debts while imposing more taxes on struggling citizens. This comes just days after Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Bade presented the 2026-2027 budget, which allocates approximately 2.56 trillion Kenyan shillings to debt serving more than half of the entire budget and leaves a deficit estimated to over 1.1 trillion Kenyan shillings that will require additional borrowing. In a press briefing on Monday, June 15, 2026, Wanjigi accused the government of prioritizing debt repayment over development, arguing that the country's fiscal policy has become captive to creditors at the expense of ordinary Kenyans. And I quote, "This budget is not about development, it is about servicing debt, and I call on Kenyans to reject it." End of quote. The Safina leader questioned why the government continues servicing debt whose legality has been publicly questioned by senior state officials. He cited recent remarks by Cabinet Secretary Aden Duale and Senate Majority Leader Aaron Jeriot, acknowledging the existence of debt that remains unaccounted for. According to Wanjigi, the government's plan to raise an additional 220 billion Kenyan shillings through the Finance Bill 2026 will only deepen the economic burden on households already grappling with high living costs, unemployment, and shrinking purchasing power. And I quote, "The solution to Kenya's economic challenges is not more taxes. Kenyans already overtaxed. Every new tax measure further weakens businesses, destroys jobs, and reduces the purchasing power of wananchi," he stated. One of the Wanjigi's arguments is the claim that Kenya's growing debt burden has become unsustainable. He noted that public debt has now risen to approximately 13 trillion Kenyan shillings, yet citizens have little to show in terms of transformative infrastructure and economic development. And I quote, "Kenyans deserve to know, where is the development that justifies the trillions borrowed? We cannot continue borrowing to pay previous debts while citizens sink deeper into poverty." End of quote. The businessman turned politician also revived his claims about a secret sovereign bond account used to facilitate borrowing outside constitutional oversight mechanisms. He argued that continued borrowing to finance debt obligations violates the spirit of constitutional provisions governing public finance. Moreover, warned that the projected 1.1 trillion Kenyan shillings budget deficit could open the door of another cycle of borrowing, worsening what he described as an economic model built on debt dependency rather than productive investment, urging financial institutions and investors against participating in future democratic borrowing programs, declaring such debt illegal and odious and cautioning that future administration may refuse to honor it. And I quote, "The 1.1 trillion deficit the budget estimates will open floodgates to more illegal borrowing, funding personal businesses as citizens drawn into poverty is to be forearmed. Buyer be aware," he warned. Wanjigi's statements add pressure to President William Ruto's government over taxation and the rising cost of living days after the United Alternative government unveiled an alternative budget that promises tax relief, lower borrowing, and increased spending on education, healthcare, and agriculture. The proposal comes as the National Treasury defends the 2026-2027 budget and the Finance Bill 2026, insisting that the government spending plans reflect priorities raised by Kenyans during the nationwide public participation exercises. Speaking ahead of the budget presentation in Parliament on Thursday, June 11, 2026, Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Badi said the budget was developed through consultations with citizens, county governments, businesses, and civil society groups. And I quote, "The proposed budget reflects that Kenyans told us during public participation. We have taken those views seriously and integrated them into the final framework," Badi said. He maintained that the budgeting process complies with the constitutional requirements and Public Finance Management Act, arguing that public views collected during sector hearing and regional forums informed the final spending proposals. Of concern is how the government plans to finance a projected 1.1 trillion Kenyan shillings fiscal deficit. Mbadi said the Treasury is banking on stronger domestic revenue mobilization and reforms the Kenya Revenue Authority (KRA) rather than excessive borrowing. And I quote, "There are still opportunities under revenue collection and domestic revenue mobilization because we still believe that KRA is not performing optimally," he said, noting that the revenue collection has fallen from about 18% of GDP in previous years of slightly above 14% currently. However, the opposition argues that the government approach risks placing additional pressure on already struggling households. In its alternate people's budget for the 2026-2027 financial year, the coalition proposes reducing the fiscal deficit from 1.11 trillion Kenyan shillings, equivalent to 1.3% of GDP, to 593.5 billion Kenyan shillings, or 2.8% GDP, while increasing total revenue, tax compliance measures, contract savings, and asset realization rather than introducing new taxes. Beyond tax relief, the alternative budget proposes increasing educational funding from 608.3 billion Kenyan shillings, 737.3 billion Kenyan shillings to fully fund free primary and secondary school capitation. Health spending could rise from 170.7 billion Kenyan shillings to 223 billion Kenyan shillings, with the opposition pledging to close funding gaps in healthcare, restate Linda Mama and Edu Afya programs, and cancel a 104 billion Kenya shillings SHA technology contract it describes as a wasteful. Until another video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share our videos. Until another video, bye for now.